So the biggest thing really is to think about, I mean, there's a lot of big things to think about, but your feed stocks, where are they going to go? What are they? How are you going to keep them dry and free of snow and ice for the winter? If you don't have your own supply, it's a good idea to ask customers, community members, your local transfer station, where you might be able to get a good ready supply throughout the winter, and then keep them mostly free of snow and moisture, because if they're moist, they'll turn into a big ice cube. Ideally, we want our carbon materials to be a little bit moist when they go in the compost, but in the winter time, they're really dry, and it's the condensation and the moisture from the food scraps, and then any extra moisture that we might need to add that moistens those in the bin. And I just can't stress it enough. When you get into needing to dump your compost in the wintertime, and if you've got to chip away at that hay bale, everything is more difficult. Or if you have to chip the poop pile, it just gets a lot more difficult. It's not impossible. You can still do it. It just takes a bit more work and maybe an ice pick. You can also reach out to your community on your listserv, Craigslist, social media, or your local feed store to get other materials. And I just want to put in a little caution to make sure that you're not intentionally importing snake worms or something like that into your property. So you do want to make sure that you know where your ingredients are coming from, and we're happy to take questions on that and answer them as best we can. Keeping a supply of wood shavings inside for, to cover the top of your buckets, or if your CSA members are dropping off materials and you've got them in a 35-gallon tote, you can't get to them right away. Putting sawdust or wood shavings on top of those will help to keep the smell down and critters out. Critters are out and about right now. They're hungry and they're looking for everything. They just came and ate all the brassicas off my property. All of them. But they didn't get the compost, which is great. Tells me I'm doing something right. You want to keep additional buckets and bins so sealed, ideally. 35-gallon barrels full of dried carbon materials are a really great way to head into the winter. You can keep those right outside as long as they're dry. When they go in the barrel with the lid, they will remain dry and be ready for you when you do your composting in the middle of winter. If you're on a larger scale, 35-gallon buckets are probably not going to be your thing. So thinking about a big pile that can be covered either by a roof or even just tin and heavy logs on top to keep it from blowing away in the wind. It's fine for all of that to get snowed on. You just don't want the snow to actually hit the materials themselves so that they don't turn into that ice cube. And keeping extra buckets or barrels or piles, you really can't have too many feedstocks when you're heading into the winter. Trying to find dry materials in the middle of February can be challenging, but again, you can check in with your local community and feed stores, your transfer center, etc., to see what they can come up with, or other local farms. Plan. Yeah, lots of planning for how you're going to maintain the way to your compost bin. So is it a path? Is it a road? Are you plowing? Do you need to move that area? Or do you need to shut down your system for the public during the winter because it's not accessible? And we never quite know if we're going to be getting a lot of snow or a lot of ice. So be thinking about those variables as well, because snow can be pretty easy to get around, but once we get icy, things get really problematic. Next slide. So your recipe may need to be adjusted for the winter time. It depends on what your recipe is, what your quality of feedstocks coming in are, how wet the food scraps are, all of that, how frozen they are. When you put them in the bin, you can add frozen food scrap to the bin, and they will heat up with the right recipe. So be aware, look at your thermometer, do your moisture tests, and just sort of keep up with the health of your compost pile and make any adjustments as necessary. I do find that sometimes in the wintertime, I need to intentionally add moisture For me and my system, it's a 5-gallon bucket system. It's just a 3-bin system. I'm able to do that when I'm washing buckets and I dump it right into the compost system. But if you have a larger pile, you're going to want to think about how to get moisture into that pile. Snow is a great way to do it. So you can be thinking about that. Entering early winter with a hot compost. So right now, if you haven't already cleared out your compost bin or started a new deposit with a really nice recipe, getting it hot, this is a good time to do that. Going into winter with an already frozen pile or a nearly full bin is just asking for problems a little bit later. So I always try to enter winter with a little bit of a base going in my compost bin and enough mass so that I have some heat when I'm making deposits. You can also add in a little more manure into your recipe in the wintertime to help keep things hot, especially if it's fresh. If you're not already adding manure, this can be a really great addition in the wintertime, and pretty much anyone's manure will do. You can reduce the need to turn by adding more bulking agents. So those are your fluffy things that come in with a lot of air. Air pockets can be a problem in the wintertime, especially if your bins aren't covered, which I highly recommend they are. If you have a windrow pile, you're going to be dealing with the weight of snow, which then squishes all the air out of the pile. So adding in more bulking agents into your pile or your bin system in your recipe is going to be really helpful to help keep that air in the pile with the weight of snow on top or the weight of extra moisture from melting snow coming into your pile. And that can look like a lot of different things. So what I try to think about is how much air is coming in with those materials. So one thing I like to just try and create a visual is if you think of all of your dry carbon materials and you mix them together and you put them in a wheelbarrow, how much air is in that wheelbarrow? That's what you want to be thinking about. How much air you're adding to the pile is a really important consideration year round, but especially as we head into wintertime. That also adds a bit of insulation to your pile. So when you're doing a lot of extra bulking agents, if you have a bin system, you might want to consider switching over to something like a nesting system where you're essentially creating a donut of really nice carbon materials and you're putting your food scraps and your active recipe in the donut hole in the center so that the whole thing has a bit of insulation around it. It also acts as a biofilter, keeping animals at bay because they're not seeing or smelling those food scraps. The best maintenance, the best of us who are out there every day working with our compost systems are going to see a difference in the wintertime. As Natasha stated, the microorganisms slow down just like we do, just like the flies in our window. Everybody slows down in the wintertime. With a little bit of attention, you can keep those temperatures up. And it may not be consistently hot, but when possible, if you want to rise that temperature, give it a turn, add some manure. Sometimes it might just need moisture, so check your feedstocks. If it's too dry, the microbes are not getting a drink, and so they're not going to be happy and reproducing at their normal rate. And yeah, so as we head into spring, that's all going to change a little bit. I think we can go to the next slide. As we head into spring, things get mucky, the pile starts to fall in on itself because it's warming up. So all those frozen bits are sinking. And then you can get a pile that's a little bit too wet or too dense. At that point, as soon as you can get into your compost pile, it's a really good idea to fluff it up or just turn the whole thing if possible. I mentioned a little bit about insulating bins. Some people actually use blue board on their bin systems. I work with some schools that like to do that. I don't think it's necessary, but it certainly can be helpful, especially in reducing wind coming into your bins. So a lot of our wooden bins are built with air gaps between the boards on purpose so that we can keep airflow in the bins. But that also lets in our winter icy wind. So using a little bit of blue board or hay bales on the outside of your bins can really help to reduce that wind. And you can Cardboard even, yeah. So you can just sort of surround your bins with any kind of material you can, and capping the top is also really important because heat rises. So we want to keep that heat in the bin. You can mix snow into your compost for moisture, but mixing in too much snow is going to cool things down. So just try and keep a balance of what you're doing there for moisture in your bin from snow. Snow packed over a tarp can work well as extra insulation. So if you don't have blue board or you don't have a large amount of hay or something like that, you can wrap in a tarp and then put up cardboard or something like that over top of it, and you can pile snow. Snow is a great insulator. And if you can keep a protection from the moisture actually hitting the compost, you'll get good wind and insular protection from snow. And feel free to add anything, girls, if I'm missing anything. So these are just some great pictures of what winter piles can look like. The one on the top left is actually my pile. We first moved to this land and in winter, we didn't have a lot of time to build bins. So we were just using as much hay as we could, getting mulch hay from people who didn't want it and using it for our compost system. So what you're looking at there is basically a full thickness of hay bale. It's not a full hay bale, they're fluffed. I pulled them apart, but that kept our compost from freezing solid all winter long. There was a frozen layer on top, but once we dug into it, like Natasha mentioned earlier, steam came pouring out. It was not reaching 140-degree temperatures in the winter like my pile normally does, but it was staying between 100 and 130 for most of the winter. So that was pretty good. On the right-hand side on top, I love how neat that pile is. And I just want to draw your attention to the hole in the center. So this is kind of getting into the donut and donut hole concept that I just talked about. This guy is digging a hole into the center of his pile and dumping his food scraps in there. And in that center is where the biological activity is going to be the best and the most active. So that's the thing to do. So then you dump your compost in there, and then you cover it back up. You can actually just use the materials that are already there to slide it back over the hole or add more if you need it. And that's one way to keep a pile going on sort of a smaller scale. So if you stop collecting food scraps from your customers, but you're still producing food scraps from your own household on the farm, you might not have the same volume that you had before, but you can still keep the pile going and do small deposits in this way. And then for scale, we've got, if you're lucky enough to have a bobcat or a machine to help you out in the winter, everything's a little bit easier. And those covers are a really good idea to just keep the falling moisture, ice and snow away from your primary composting area. Next slide. So moisture. Moisture is a tricky thing in the winter. We want it to be moist, but moisture also equals ice. So again, moisture and temperature together are going to help to keep those microbes active along with air. So adding food scraps in the winter definitely helps to keep your moisture up, especially if you add them when they're fresh and you don't let them get all wizened first and let the moisture evaporate out of them. So it's a good idea to try and keep fresh deposits going in the wintertime of food scraps. On warmer, rainy days, yeah, you can lift your bin cover. You can let it get some sun. If you want to melt snow that's in there, you can let it get some rain or even some snow into the bin to get some moisture, but time that, and I wouldn't do it overnight unless it's a really warm night. And your compost tumbler will also need extra monitoring for moisture. Most tumblers will freeze in the winter, but there are those insulated varieties that while they slow down, if you're using them and turning them regularly and adding materials, they should continue to move through the winter with lower microbial activity, but still some possible.